Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final session of Winning Work in Education and Healthcare. I'm Holly Ty, Specification Editor at Assemble Media Group, and today I'm joined by Martin Jones, Landscape Architect Director at BDP. Martin's going to be exploring the role of biophilic design in the healthcare sector with a range of projects in various settings, as well as looking at some of the benefits and barriers to implementation. There will be time at the end for a Q&A, so please do send in any questions you have throughout. And I'm going to pass over to Martin.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to have been invited to talk today. I must say that I'm not a scholar or academic or researcher in biophilic design, but I'm a passionate designer and a great believer in the healing benefits and the therapeutic benefits that landscape and designing with nature can bring to the healthcare setting. And basically, I've worked with BDP pretty much all my working life, and I've been lucky enough to work on some of them, some very impressive hospital and healthcare developments at various scales, from the super acute hospital down to the sort of local GP hub and health centre and all that sort of stuff. So there's various scales of development that I've been working on, and I've had a few battles over the years to try and get landscape schemes through the sort of VE sessions and cost planning sessions and all that. And, I think, the world has changed now, and there's a much better recognition of how landscape can benefit the healing process and all the people that work and are associated with it. So if I just very quickly try and share my screen, just bear with me. I do it by pick that one and then just click that. Hopefully you're all seeing that. So effectively, if we look at the sort of what, why and how, I think most people are aware of biophilic design and working with nature. It's primarily to do exposing people to nature. And I think the sort of, the pandemic brought home to everybody how important green space is in the world, particularly at a local level. But I think, in a healthcare environment, it's not easy to bring green into buildings and deal with all the sort of challenges that brings with it. I'm also going to talk a lot, about why it's important, and then maybe how we might implement more biophilic designs in our healing environments. I think effectively it's a cooperation of nature. It looks at sort of elements of nature, such as plants, water, natural materials like wood and stone. And the easy one is views of outdoor landscapes, which is really important. Natural light and ventilation. And then there's a lot of the sort of biomorphic forms coming into design now. I'm a great believer in sort of fluid geometry and natural shapes and nature, and helping to create harmonious and calming environments. And then clearly spaces change and landscapes mature, but it's also good to be exposed to the elements like wind, water, and hear the sound of birdsong and the like. And then obviously it's a very sustainable world we live in now, and we need to try and sort of realise that and assess what the impact of this sort of built development is going on in the environment. Because I think bringing landscapes onto buildings has its own sort of challenges in terms of carbon and additional structure, etc., etc. So why is it important? So, I think we've got, it connects us with nature. There's lots of evidence now to sort of say it's worth the extra investment. It improves recovery, improves well-being, and improves productivity. And I'm great fan of the therapeutic value, the benefit that green space brings into hospitals. We've got a sort of little conceptual diagram here, which sort of we took from the sort of Dublin Children's Hospital that we're working on. But effectively, the various elements that we can introduce into the built environment of the hospital is, the gardens, sensory gardens, winter gardens, borrowed landscape and views out into landscape. And I think blurring the boundaries between indoors and outdoors is a good one also. And then clearly, everyone knows about green walls. But there's a difference between green walls and living walls. And green roofs are great, but they can sort of add cost and structure and carbon. I'm a great believer in the healing qualities of water, but there's all sorts of challenges associated with convincing health boards and estates departments to sort of let us use water. And then clearly nature-based drainage solutions are a great thing nowadays, and it's going to be a requirement. Certainly it is in Wales at the moment, and they're ahead of the game in that respect, but it's coming to England soon as well. And that means not sticking it all underground in pipes and tanks. It's actually using it at the surface. And clearly we need to design with nature at various scales, from the regional down to the individual building. And Ian McHarg, the great sort of landscape architect and landscape planner, was a sort of real sort of advocate of designing with nature and building where you should and not building where you shouldn't. So I think if I sort of show a few examples of our healing environments, I think this is a sort of pretty much, I think it's all BDP's work. Most of it is mine, but not all of it. And we've got a very talented landscape team working on a number of healthcare projects. Some are in the ground, some are finished. This is a sort of picture of the sort of Oak Cancer Centre at the Royal Marsden, with a lonesome tree in the centre of the atrium. But I think if I go back to the sort of noughties, and I think this, I took these photos. This was a scheme I worked on in 2007. It was the Queen's Hospital in Romford, and this is, whilst it was a great landscape scheme and well organised site plan, and I think there was a very distinct sort of difference between inside and out. It was an inward-looking hospital, and all the cost and everything was driven into the building, not in the landscape. So it's a well-organised scheme, but it isn't necessarily a biophilic design as such. This is I think this opened a couple of years ago, a year old, just at the end of the pandemic. It's the Grange University Hospital in Cwmbran in South Wales. We did it with Langeroog and the Aneurin Bevan Health Board, and it's a fantastic example of borrowing landscape. I mean, I worked, when I started work at BDP, I remember I was working on Ormskirk Hospital, and a colleague said to me, an architect said, "Martin, if you ever want a job for life, work in a hospital, because they take a long time to happen." I know even with these modern trends of off-site construction and modern methods of construction, they can take. We started working on this in 2007, and it was the best part of 20 years in the making. But it's a great sort of example where we sort of looked at the site, and as a landscape architect, I'm proud that we positioned the building with the local community, keep it as far away from the sort of neighbours as well as we could, but also to expose it to a magnificent landscape setting. It's a sort of area of special landscape runs straight up to the sort of building on both sides, so it's sort of sitting in a landscape rather than in a sea of cars. So we put the car parking to one side, and we had a really sort of direct and legible approach to the building, because I think wellbeing in healthcare design starts with the site planning and organisation, and I think that's fundamental. And I think a lot of people do it, obviously know it, and architects are the same. But it's all about the patient journey, patient dignity, creating a clear and legible approach to the building. And one thing we've learned is visitor parking is really good next to the main entrance, and then obviously separating the flows. And this is the sort of diagram of the hospital itself, with the sort of inpatient care in the light green, the diagnostic and treatment area in the sort of terracotta, and then the blue is the sort of main entrance with visitor and staff support, and then there's an energy centre at the back there as well. And then effectively it was sited to exploit the surrounding landscape, so we get views. This is the sort of theatres looking out to the east, but more importantly, the sort of the wards themselves are mostly single bedrooms, and they all look out across this stunning valley, and that's the view to the west. So you could just picture the sort of sunset and all that, and the sunrise and the like. So what a fantastic environment that creates. And it also improves the staff. This is the sort of staff and visitor restaurant area. When we've exploited the views from that one as well. Courtyards bring light down into the building, And the landscape concept is being sort of undermined a little bit because you've got to think about cleaning and maintenance in these courtyards now. And I think these strategies are sort of one of the real challenges of introducing planting immediately close and in and around buildings as well. So there's lessons learned and to be learned there. Another key element of the hospital is its relationship with this historic building called Llanfairpwll Grange House, and we'd created a spine between the sort of, one of the key site planning principles was to create this spine. These are pictures of what was the walled garden for the historic building, and here you could see it was derelict and totally derelict. And we convinced the health board that it would be a good idea to try and restore it or create a sort of wellbeing garden for the staff and visitors and patients. And we came up with these concepts, and unfortunately there was no funding for it, but it did happen, and it all happened because of volunteers. So I think the community got behind this and really got involved, and it was all done with a little bit of help from Langer, but I think it was primarily a community-driven facility, and it's a marvellous little garden to allow respite and recovery and a bit of therapeutic healing. And it's great to see it after all these years come to fruition. So it's a great asset. So these gardens are sort of the sort of things we need to try and weave into our hospitals. Another example of great sort of a biophilic approach effectively is that it's another super hospital, I'm afraid, but it's the Southmead Hospital in North Bristol NHS Trust. It was built by Carillion under the PFI and is now being managed, I think, by Bouygues. But I think the whole sort of essence of the building form and edges sort of breaking down to allow gardens and natural light into the deeper parts of the building. This is the sort of ward block on this side, and then this side is all about treatment and theatres and the like, and fingers of courtyards penetrating the heart of the building, all linked with a hospital street at various levels, and a very, very sort of legible drop-off area. We put in new road access and new parks and integrated historic buildings. It's a great project to have worked on. It was built into an operational hospital, so it was built in 3 phases. So the main hospital phase, then all the associated car parking, and then most recently was completing all the landscape infrastructure, which is fabulous. And this is an aerial photograph of it, and it's so proud to have been associated with a lot of this on the site planning and master planning. But this is the main approach. This is the main entrance and drop-off area with several buses, bus stops and taxis at ever such a busy place. And then you can see the staff car park and beyond. But it's a very green master plan, lots of biophilic elements. There's green roofs, there's brown roofs, there's courtyards for therapy. And then if you can look around here, there's drainage swales and wetlands. And here's some pictures of it finished here where we've got courtyards overlooking gardens. Some of the gardens are actually for therapy and physiotherapy as well. And then the more sort of, the trusts have taken ownership of all of this and driven it and made it much more sustainable and ecologically friendly. And it's a huge benefit for the trust. They're very, very sort of forward thinking in that respect. This is the landscape team from BDP planting some additional trees in a sort of community tree planting event. This is a sort of garden terrace up on the rooftop where staff can sit out and have their lunch and take the views across Bristol. And all the planters were replanted with herbs by the local staff. And now these herbs are actually used in the kitchen for helping with the cooking as well. So fantastic. They've also got this wellbeing trail where they encourage people to get out and walk and give you sort of guidance, but get around the site. And it just, the road to recovery, they call it, which I think is a great idea in terms of wellbeing as well, encouraging us all to move around a bit more. And some of the sort of stats here are pretty fantastic in terms of the green spaces in the master plan. We've planted over 700 trees. There's like nearly 5,000 square metres of wetlands, 400 metres of swales, wildflower meadows, green, brown roofs, therapy gardens and courtyards. It's pretty amazing. Moving on to more recent projects, we've got our cancer treatment centre at Clatterbridge in Liverpool, which is where we've got terraced gardens going up the face of the building and a winter garden at the main entrance, which is good. Here's a cross section through it. Much more building, really dense building without the benefit of a great landscaped site around it. But obviously landscape on the building is really important. And then Alder Hey Children's Hospital, not too far away as well, where it was integrated into a neighbouring park, and the green of the park was part of the architectural concept to bring the landscape over the building, as you can see here. So there's some great examples there of sort of biophilia entering and penetrating the building, as you can see, and this is delivered here. And again, some examples of how we've integrated terracing and courtyards into the building. This is a super project in Dublin. It's the biggest project in Ireland. It's Dublin's Children's Hospital, and it is effectively a building covered in landscape, effectively. So there's no site, it's just all building. So it's a huge piece of work in Dublin, and it's kept us very busy for a number of years. It's all getting built out. I think it's in the final stages now, but a lot of the landscape concepts are sort of integral to the sort of children's particularly healing process, where we've got staff and therapy terraces, a rainbow garden enclosed at the roof top level, which is absolutely an amazing sort of garden space. And we've integrated the idea of improving this sort of environment for children, and this is some examples of it being built now. Some courtyards in shady spaces with the shady landscape design, and then most of the landscape is up on the building, so it needs extra build up and the like for all the soils and the green. So it's bringing nature onto the building, which is a great example. And then this one is still on the drawing board, or on the sort of bin model, if you like, but effectively it's this Great Alden Streets new Children's Cancer Treatment Centre, where we've used roof gardens and window boxes to sort of green the elevation and facades, and balcony planters, which just, this is, I'm not sure when it starts on site, but it's in stage 4 at the moment. But you can see we've got roof gardens, we've got balconies and play areas and streetscape improvements as well. And you can see here connections and where we've got the clues from on the window boxes, and how we've sort of tried to reduce the building energy demand and improve the hospital entrances and high quality accessible outdoor spaces. Here are the sort of pictures of some of the children's terraces at the moment. And then another one, which this drops down a scale, but it's an elective care centre in Ascot, which we call the Hospital in the Woods. Effectively, this is the new hospital here, and this is where the old hospital was. And this is where one of the Carry On, I think it was Carry On Doctor, was filmed. And the hospital is very, very similar to the Carry On Times, but it's all closed now and has been sold off for redevelopment for housing, which has part funded the hospital. And the hospital has been located in an existing woodland on a very, very challenging site. But we're calling it, and the landscape scheme will bring it into the sort of integrate it into the woodland setting. And here's the sort of site plan here, where we've got the positioning of the hospital in the woods sort of creates this pavilion, and it enhances the recovery and rehabilitation. So this is borrowing the surrounding trees to try and improve the garden, the experience of the patient and visitor. And it was a real challenge to sort of deal with all the changing levels and topography and make it a sort of create this plateau on the side of a hill. And this is the scheme developed. It's built by Kia, and a really successful piece of work. and it's a fantastic environment. It is open now I think it's for about a year. But I think the internal views out into the landscape, like wells and courtyards, bringing splashes of green into the internal environment, and then the recreational spaces and amenity spaces within the building, looking out into the trees. Absolutely amazing. And there's some of the landscape reinstatement works of the woodland. So the huge number of trees replanted to offset what we had to take down to accommodate the hospital. But it'll be when they mature, it'll be amazing. This is a view from across the balancing pond. So these sustainable drainage is going to, rather than putting it all in tanks now, you're going to be creating ponds like this if you've got the space. In Wales, they just won't accept anything else, and ultimately it's designed to fill with water. And then on a smaller scale again, we've got a little scheme that I did, similar timescale to the initial Romford one, but it was the first it's a nursing home in Sligo for the Sisters of Nazareth, and we worked with Hough House architects, who were the I don't know, they must have been at the forefront of off-site manufacture and design, because these buildings came to the site on the back of a lorry. So it was a pretty amazing experience back then to be doing this project. But there was a great sort of interconnection between the landscape and the building. And I'm really proud of this piece of work. I think it's a 60-bed nursing home. And these are pictures from the noughties, really, when it was implemented, and it has matured beautifully. But you could see the integration of landscape into the sort of building, and the sort of, this is a balancing pond and a water body, because water is really important in the healing environment as well. And then the sort of blurring between indoors and out, where natural materials can flow in and out of the building, and get bedrooms have the benefit of the views out across this wonderful landscape. Natural materials used in the external courtyards as well. And this is a little aerial view of it. Now, this is more recent and it's matured beautifully, but I think this is, a really fabulous sort of design. And, it was really great to work on it. I'm really proud of it. This is a scheme we did in Taunton. It's this Jubilee building for Musgrove Park Hospital. And the landscape in the courtyard has got a water feature in it, because it's a really integral part of it. But not everyone is a big fan of water, so there's quite a few barriers. I've used these slides. I mean, it's a great hospital, don't get me wrong, but I think I've used this slide to sort of discuss perhaps a few barriers and obstacles to doing landscape in and around buildings. At the bottom of the list that I put, there's a lack of recognised standards on this. I don't think there's any HBN relating to biophilia or landscape works. I think there's a sort of general one about estates and car parking, but it's never been updated for many years. Infection control is obviously the big one, that they worry about water particularly, and growing things internally, and that sort of important sort of keeping that clinical functionality and safety is so important in the internal environment. Maybe in the more communal areas it will work, but certainly it won't work in the sort of sensitive areas. Cost is another sort of challenge, and it's important that our cost plans reflect, or our cost planners build in this sort of the benefits and look at the sort of life cycle of the building and all the people that is going to benefit. So the cost of the landscape work getting properly built into the scheme. Maintenance has to be really carefully thought through. A lot of health boards and trusts rely on volunteers to maintain their grounds and maintenance. And that was the beauty of the PFI process, because it's, the landscape is built into the maintenance for sort of, I think it's 60 years or something like that. So it's a really, or 30 years, sorry. And it's really a really key thing to consider. Health and safety is another one, using water, people infections, things like that. There's really important considerations there. I mentioned additional carbon. Green roofs need a bigger structure normally, so that adds cost and carbon. And that's about it, really. And I think looking overseas, I mean, there are countries like Singapore where they've got a really different healthcare approach and a better funded health service, I'm sure. But biophilia is a pretty massive thing over there. And this hospital, I think most people have seen or been aware of if you're interested in biophilic design. But this is another planet, and the place is dripping in planting. But I don't think we're quite ready for that in the UK yet, or could afford it, because it all needs maintenance, and it needs whilst they've got a tropical climate, it all needs irrigating and the like. So all that as a sort of potential thing that we need to consider. And that's me. Thank you. So I just escape from that. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was fantastic. Some really interesting projects there. We've had a lot of questions come through.
Right.
So I'm going to chuck some at you and just see how many we can tackle before the end of the session. One from me, just to kickstart things. You touched briefly on the COVID pandemic and kind of the changes that it brought about in terms of our thoughts and perceptions on well-being. What do you think are the main factors driving our movement towards biophilic design? Because it's become quite a buzzword recently.
It has so's placemaker. There's so many buzzwords knocking around now, but I think biophilic design has always been with us. It's getting people to buy into it, and it's pretty much design. It's nature and landscape is a big part of it, but also there's all natural materials and exposing people to nature. But I think a lot of it is a need for proper funding and a commitment to look after your landscape scheme. That's one of the sort of key things, is to sort of don't do it if you're not going to look after it, because it can look dreadful if it's not done properly. And hard landscape and tarmac and grass are probably the sort of base. It's probably the baseline for most cost plans, I would have thought, particularly in education settings. But I think we need to sort of try and raise the bar, and that's done by evidence-based design, really. So I think.
Talking about funding, someone has asked, there's increased costs associated with the advancement of healthy buildings. How do you sell that to stakeholders? I don't know if they're specifically talking about healthcare or they're talking about kind of other sectors there too.
It pays for itself. That's the argument. So, it keeps people out of hospital. So that's the idea, and certainly in Wales it's much, and it's happening in England as well now. They're investing in green spaces and incorporating living walls, green roofs into developments. All helps, and it helps with in the workplace, in education. It helps. The biophilic design helps with all of that, and the extra costs will help keep people out of hospital, because it helps with their mental well-being and reduces stress and increases productivity. But somebody needs to do risk. I mean, I'm working with a doctor at University of West of England. I've been working because she's doing some research into the benefits of these green spaces on healing and people's well-being. So the more we can get the evidence based, like Roger Ulrich many years ago sort of convinced people to sort of not do the inward-looking box, and sort of how good it was to have windows and look out across something. And it's really just getting that costed, and if you look at the overall cost benefit, I think it sells itself then.
Definitely. When you kicked off the presentation, you talked about well-being in healthcare design starts with site planning and organisation, I think was where you went. What would you say were kind of the key specifications for designing biophilia into healthcare settings? Where should designers be starting when they're making their specification choices?
Well, I think siting the building is important. I mean, it depends what the project is. If it's right in the middle of a city centre or an urban setting, but if you've got the benefit of a bigger site, how you organise a site is really important. But the specification for materials, we should be trying to use carbon neutral products, obviously, but natural materials where we can. It's just the data. There's a lot of data for buildings, but not much data for landscape, if you understand what I mean. And I think the more we catch up with the building world, the better it'll be, because I think most focus is on the sort of performance of the buildings themselves rather than the landscape in and around them and on them. And I think the sooner we get more evidence on that, the better, really. But I think use of natural materials is important, I think.
Talking about natural materials, we had a question about net zero. We've kind of spoken about sustainable materials, but someone asked, to what extent does designing for well-being and designing for net zero overlap? And specifically, have you ever experienced a conflict between the two?
Yes. I mean, I think only last week I was in a conversation with an architect for an industrial building.
Okay.
All right, which was like, biodiversity net gain is coming through, and that's part of the carbon factor as well. And I asked if we could have a green roof, and he said no, because the extra structure that you put in will be a disaster from a net zero carbon perspective. So there's definitely conflicts there. So greening buildings probably require quite a lot of additional structure and maintenance and watering and all that sort of stuff, which sort of goes against the sort of...
Is that due to the weight of a green roof that you need additional?
Yes, pretty much, yeah. But then you've got to look after it. And then obviously we need to start thinking about more drought-resistant landscapes, so they don't need watering. But 9 times out of 10, you need to think about being able to water stuff that's on top of a building, because it is like planting it on a block of concrete, effectively, isn't it? So it's very difficult to get the plants to grow.
Okay. How do you manage that? If you're thinking about designing for well-being and then you're thinking about designing for net zero, is there one that tops the other, or is it circumstantial?
It's early days. I don't know is the answer, and I think all my sustainability colleagues at EDP, because they're right at the forefront of it.
Yeah,
they are focused pretty much on building materials and elevation and cladding and rooftops, and I'm sure we'll catch up and we'll get them pinned down on the sort of carbon impact of landscape materials in due course, I'm sure. But
brilliant.
I don't think it's everybody's sort of focus just yet.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
We have a question from Anne. Do you think there are ways in which new technologies can help bring biophilia into healthcare settings? Can modern technology be used? It's a very specific question. A great one, but very specific.
Yeah. Well, I don't know a lot about AI and all this sort of alternative sort of visual impact and technology, all this sort of virtual reality world that we could do, but I'm sure there's something could be done. You can create a virtual bedroom or something like that in a hospital. I'm sure that's the way it's going.
Well, I mean, it's hard to think about the future, isn't it? But it's probably, flying cars, AI.
That's all I can think about, really. But I think, I mean, landscape schemes are pretty low tech, if I'm honest. But I think, and nature is, but I think it'd be important to consider it and be at the forefront of it, because it's going to become more and more a requirement now for, not just in healthcare setting, biodiversity net gain, all this sort of nature-based drainage solutions is going to impact all developments. So we need to sort of be ready for it.
Yeah. Catherine's asked, are there any known cost-benefit analysis for green roofs, walls, and when the benefits outweigh the detrimental effect in terms of carbon? We touched on this briefly.
We did, yeah. I'm sure there are, but I'm not the world's greatest expert. I know a guy called Dusty Gedge, he's like the president of the European Institute of Green Roofers. But I think he's passionate about it, and I'm sure we could find out and get some, real sort of facts and figures. It's got to happen.
Yep.
And it's, even retrofitting them. It's going to happen, and whilst it might need a bit more structure, it's going to help the sort of urban environments. It's going to reduce the heat effect of all our developments. So the sooner we get a hold of it, the better. It's just that health, the health the people responsible for the clinical environments are very nervous about having those things floating above their theatres and like storing water, which the roofs could leak. You know, and you can understand why.
Yeah. There's also a big issue of water scarcity, isn't there, which people are rightly concerned about.
Yeah. So recycling water is important.
Yeah. When you're designing a space to incorporate biophilic design, particularly in the projects that you mentioned today, did you consider designing them to be inclusive too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, everything, and it's not just about disabled wheelchair users. It's about everybody. And you know, I worked with the University of Worcester. It was on their 7 campus, laying that out for them. And I had to present the scheme to a blind lady, which I'd never done before. And it was pretty scary having to do that. And I think the next time I went armed with a model and a sort of tactile relief, so she could feel her way around the spaces and everything. So I think inclusive design is so important, particularly these days. And it's not just for disabled people; it's for girls, and making space for girls, and you know, it's just spaces for all, where everyone feels safe and belonging. Yeah, that's quite important.
We had another question. You touched briefly on a few designs that were outside of the UK. How does the UK approach to biophilic architecture compare to the rest of the world? Do you think we're behind?
Yes, I suppose we are really, but I think there's so many people in the sort of healthcare estate, leaders of the healthcare, they're sort of tried and trusted methodologies and methods. I don't think encourage people to do something new is difficult, isn't it? Always, but I think we are, yeah. But we need to refresh our standards and look at it, look at the healing benefits, and somebody can do the sums to sort of say it is worth it.
Well,
but then nobody else has got an NHS, have they? That's the problem.
yeah.
It's sort of straining and struggling. Most other countries pay for their health, don't they? So I think, particularly that Singapore example, I think it's a different climate, different way of life, and a different lifestyle out there. But but there are ways just in the planning and organisation and the interrelationship between the building and the landscape doesn't cost more money. It's when you start putting it inside and on the building, it starts to impact.
Someone else did ask if you thought that the introduction of regulations would help kind of drive it forward in the UK.
Yes, for sure, and it's coming. It's coming for sure. You know, I know they've just canned the sort of idea of nutrient quality, aren't they? Because of pressure to build houses. Well, biodiversity net gain is coming in this November, so that'll be a requirement for every development, including hospitals, to improve the biodiversity of their, which is nature, and you know, so that you know that's coming. That's going to be good. It'll be a game changer, and there's something similar coming in on the drainage front that they've got in Wales at the moment, which is all about sustainable drainage, rather than keeping it on the ground and infiltrating into the ground, rather than putting it all into the pipe system. So that'll all help. But I do think our healthcare standards need a little bit of an update, or maybe a new standard to cover biophilic design or landscape and buildings. And
your designs you showed, particularly the ones for Great Ormond Street Hospital, they seemed very forward thinking. What do you predict the future is going to look like for biophilia in the built environment?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's coming. I mean, it's just I'm not sure about these new technologies. But I think the sort of healing environment is changing all the time, isn't it? I think a lot of the problem we've got such an aging healthcare estate. You know, some of it is like just as it was just after the war. You know, and I think that's why all these hospitals are getting built and so much investment having to go into them. But I think it is not necessary for biophilic. I think the focus at the moment is all about off-site manufacture and getting things done quickly. I don't think biophilia is right up there, if I'm honest, at the moment, in terms of, I think that's one of the challenges. Maybe we need to get it up there because of its long-term benefits, but I don't think the sort of standards are sort of all the sort of the immediate future for me is it's all about getting it built and getting it built quickly. I think that's
quick and cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a question from Harry about the lack of regulations for landscaping. Do you think that improves the quality of design, or does it lead to a lack of authority for designers to utilise when debating justifying design decisions with clients?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's useful if the client has to do it, because landscape is a soft target for clients potentially. Some of our clients are fantastic and really sort of understand and get it in terms of the landscape, but some, when pennies are short, and they'd rather have a sort of new roof on the building than have a landscape scheme, if you understand what I mean. So you can understand that as well. So I think having the regulations there would help sort of protect the landscape works, I think, or the landscape design, or the biophilic design.
Another question from Dwayne, who's asked any thoughts on Brighton's 3 Ts, stage 1, difficult inner city site. That's the revamp.
I had it in it's a BDP job, so I think.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad I asked.
I didn't work on it, but I think it's been trying. They've been trying, but hospitals take forever, and it's been built in phases. So I think we did the big children's thing at the back of the site, looking out over the sea. It's great, but I'm not quite sure where it is at the moment in terms of its construction.
So as in they're going to have, patients will have sea views from them?
Some have. Oh, yeah, they have already, because it's on the side of the hill looking out across the sea. So that, I think the sea, I took some pictures out, but we had seagulls sat on top of the planters.
Oh, amazing.
Across the sea. But yeah, no, it's a great site.
Brilliant. We've only got a few minutes left, so I think I'm going to finish by asking you if you wanted people to walk away with a kind of key takeaway from the session, what would your key takeaway be?
Oh, dear.
It's hard because it's such a broad topic, isn't it?
It's a huge topic, but I sort of look at it from, designing with nature is really important, and at a sort of strategic scale, but down at the sort of local scale, it's really important that people feel that sort of sense of place and belonging and happy and comfortable and safe in their landscapes. And that includes healthcare environments as well. It's not just, so I think creating places for people and making them feel safe and comfortable in a natural setting, really, I think is where I'd probably leave it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to call it there because we've got so many questions. We could probably talk for a whole nother webinar. I just want to flag before the end that this session and all of our sessions from the last 2 days of this program are available free on demand for 12 months via the same link that you joined by today. It usually takes about 30 minutes for the video to kind of turn around and upload. But if you want to rewatch or share with a colleague, then please do. Thank you so much to Martin for your prep, your expertise. It's been a pleasure to have you on. And thank you to everyone that tuned in at home.
Thank you very much.